Hello and welcome. In this video, we are going to see what is a file ownership and also what are the permissions that are associated with a file and how we can change that ownership or file permissions. In Unix environment, and that's not specifically for Linux, in Unix environment as a rule, normally there is three tier of permissions and ownership. And it's like who is the owner of that particular file, then what group that particular file belongs to. So all the users in that particular group, if they have got specific permissions for that file that we'll see in a while, they will be able to manage or execute it. And then there is rest of the world, which we call as others. So by default, owner is allowed to do anything and everything with the file because he or she might have created it. Group has got somewhat restricted access to that file, and others, depending upon the situation, may have restricted access or may have no access at all to perform any operation on the file. The same three-tier ownership and permission structure that is true for folders as well. So not only files but folders are also have got ownership for that particular owner, may have access with certain group privileges and with other privileges or for rest of the world. So let's bring up the terminal and let's see all this action in working. So I'm here at the terminal and I am logged in with the user ABC, and it's a 1-2 box. And if I press, let's first say where I stand at the moment. So I'm in my home directory. If I do ls-l for long listing, and if we have a look at the file which is 1 and also the folders, this 1, if we look at over here, we see that these strange characters, in fact it's a pair of 3 characters. These are a pair of 3 characters. This one is a pair of 3 characters, and then this one is also a pair of 3 characters. This preceding dash that you can see over here, this one, or this D, it signifies that whether it's a file or a directory. Sometimes this preceding character could be S, which means that it's a socket, or it could also be a B, small b, which means that it's a block device. So devices like your hard disk or your mouse or keyboard, which are all block devices, and keyboard and the mouse, I believe they are serial devices, they are not block devices. But for your hard disk or your pen drives, you will find that there will be a B written over here. Now this line, if you look at this one, this ABC, this signifies that it's the owner or who is the owner for this particular file or these folders. While this second ABC, this is the group. So let's try to change the owner of this file 1 or maybe examples.desktop. So the way would be to use sudo command, and then let's try to first change the group. So we can do change group command, and then the group name, which is ABC, and then the file name, which is, let's say, 1. So once we do that and I take a long listing again, I need to change the group. So we had created a user Sarah. There's a user in here Sarah whose group is also Sarah. So let's just change it to Sarah and let's do a long listing again. And now we see that indeed the group for file named 1 has been changed to Sarah. Now in order to change the owner, the command is sudo, then change owner, and then the username that we want to change it to, and then the file name, which in this case is 1. Once we do that and do a long listing for that particular file 1, we see that indeed it has been changed to Sarah and group is also Sarah. Now coming over to the file permissions, which are over here, these are dictating the file permissions. Let me come on to the board and tell you what does it really mean. So we have characters like this one. This is the first character. let's just say that we are talking about files at the moment. After that, we have characters like maybe denote them with dashes. So 3 dashes, then 3 more dashes, and then 3 more dashes. Now these values, the values that we can put on these dashes could either be R, which stands for read. It could either be W, which stands for write, or it can be a small x, which stands for execute. So any of these values could be put into these places. It could be like read, write, then blank, then it could be read, then blank, and then it could all be blank. So what that would mean, I told you that these first 3 values, most significant 3 values excluding this one, let me just cut this one over. So we are only concerned about these 9 values starting from the left side. So the first 3 values, they belong to the owner of the file. So what this means is that a owner, whosoever is the owner of this file, he can read the file and he can change the contents of the file or write the file. But since execute bit is not set, so he cannot execute or she cannot execute the file. If it's an executable file and he or she tries to execute it, it will give the error that you do not have the permission. While this case over here, this is for group. So this one is for the group, and this read bit means is that all those users who belong to the same group that this particular file belongs to, they will be able to only read the file and cannot change the contents of it, and neither they can execute the file because these bits are not set. For third part, this is for others or for rest of the world or any other user. We see that no permission has been defined over here. So all those users who are neither the owner nor do they belong to that particular file group, they will not be either to view the file, nor they will be able to write the file, and of course they will not be able to execute the file. Now in case of directory, these all values hold the same meaning, but this execute, because you cannot execute the directory. In case of directory, if this flag is set, like X is over here or maybe over here as well for group as well, then it means that these users can get into that particular directory, like maybe they can use the cd command and then the directory name, and they will be able to get into the directory, and then they can execute the ls command, which will be translated in case of directory as read, or they can read the contents of the directory, maybe different directories within that directory or the files. So they can do the listing. Likewise, they if in case of directory, they can create files in there if W flag is set. If this is not set, then user can definitely view the contents of the directory, but he will not be able to create files in that directory. So just remember that 9 fields: read, write, execute, and you have to write them in this order. It cannot be like write, then execute, then read. Now the values are always like that: read, write, execute, read, write, execute, and read, write, execute. Now we can use these notations in shape of this one. If we want to change the, let's say, file permissions, what we can do is use the command change mod, and then we can define if we want to change the user based permission or the owner based permissions. And let's say the initial permissions were like read and write and no execute. So we want that the owner of this file should be able to execute as well. So we will put a plus sign and then an x, small x, and then the file name. So what we'll do is that once we see the output, we will see that the permissions of that file for this particular user have been changed to read, write, and execute. Now we can do the same thing for group and others as well by putting in commas in there, and we can also try to change the or take the permissions off from the group. For example, maybe group is having read and execute permission, and we want to remove these permissions. What we will do is that we will put a small g and then afterwards minus sign and then small x. For others, this field we can use O and then either plus or minus and then the particular character that we want to add or remove from that permissions. Now you see that if we have multiple permissions that we want to assign to a particular user or maybe a group, or we want to remove those permissions, we will have to write this long string. Now there is a shorter way to do that as well, and that is called as octal notation. Octal stands for base 8. Let's not go into detail what does it mean. Let's just try to focus on this thing, that for octal notations, this read, this R bit, it is given a value of 4. This write bit, it is given a value of 2, and this third executable bit, it is given a value of 1. So read is 4, write is 2, and execute is 1. And once we write down the permission for owner, we do not write it like maybe if a user has been, if the owner has been given permission, let's say read, write and execute, then we will not write it like 4, 2, 1. Rather we will sum them up and we will just write 7. So 7 would mean that a user has got full permission. He can read the file, he can write the file, and he can execute the file as well. So instead of doing all the pluses and minuses, we will simply write down one digit or one number. So in case we want that, let's take an example. Let's say that we have a file and let's call it file 1, and that file 1 owner should be able to read, write, execute. So read, write, execute. The group should be able to read and execute, like in this case over here. So this is for group, read and execute. I am leaving this blank over here because this is write position, WRITE, write. And the third one for others, let's just say that others can only read the file. So read. Now putting in the numbers value or octal values in here, this will be 7, right? This will be 4. There is no write, but there is execute. So 4 plus 1, it will be 5. And in this case, since there is only read, so only 4. So once I'll be using the change mode command to use this notation, I will type in change mode 754 without any gap in between. It will be like this, change mode 754 and then the file name. And the permissions that we have defined over here, they will be put in place on that particular file. So now let's head over to the terminal and see how we can set the permissions on a file. So I am here at the terminal. Let's see, you see over here, the file permissions in this case for file 1 for user Sarah, group Sarah, and for other are read, write, execute is none. Likewise, read, write, execute is none, and read only. So this is 6 in case of octal notation. This is also 6 and this is 4. So permissions are 6, 6, 4. Let's first try to change it to read, write and execute by using the command sudo, or since this is Sarah itself, Sarah is the owner, so we can use the command without sudo by typing in change mode, then user plus x, and then give it the file name. And it is saying that we need the root permission to do that. So let's use the root privileges. And now let's try to see the file permissions for file number 1. Now if we see over here, we see that the value of permissions has been changed to read, write, execute. Earlier it was read, write only. Now it is read, write, execute. So now this Sarah user can execute the file as well. Let's bring it back to its original position by taking out the executable flag. Let's have a look at it one more time, and indeed that flag has been removed. Now let's try to accomplish the same thing for not only for user or owner, but for group and for others as well. And the permissions that let's just try to set that owner should be able to execute all or all three flags should be set. In case of let's say in case of group should be able to read and write or maybe change this value. Group should be able to read and execute and not write. And in case of other, they should only be able to execute. So how we can do that using octal notation in one go? So the way to do that is sudo and then change mode is the command. Now we know that read, write, execute combination equals to number 7. And since we are trying to do read and execute only on this part, so this value will be 5. And since we are trying to do execute only for others, so we put in 1. X value in case of octal notation is 1. And then the file name. Now once we do that and have a look at the file permissions, we see that indeed they have been changed. This has become read, write, execute. This is now read and execute only. Write has been removed, and then read has been removed and only execute bit has been set. Now the same operation goes for directories as well, but in case of directories, if you are setting the file ownership on a directory or maybe changing the mode of a directory, then you might want to do it in a recursive fashion by using -r flag after the command. For example, in case of change mode, you will use the -r flag, which would say that recursively do it, so that for all the directories and files in that particular folder, they recursively get those permissions or inherit those values that you are trying to set for that particular folder. Now the last thing that I want to tell you about ownership and permissions is the concept of umask or user mask. And let me just show you one thing. Let's just try to touch a file or create a file by using touch command, and let's just call this file as 2. Now if I do an ls-l for 2, we see that this file has got read, write, execute permission by default. Group has also got read, write, my mistake, pardon me, execute is not there, only read, write. And for group is also read, write, but for others it's read only. So how did it get these permissions? I mean, we just only created the command. Why not any other permission? Well, the answer is the umask. And these values are usually defined. Most of the time they are defined either in etc bash rc file, or they are either defined in etc profile file. So etc profile is another location, or sometimes they are defined in etc, I believe, login.defaults. So login.defs or login.defaults. So if we look at these files, if let's say in case of Debian-based distribution, login.default is used, login.profile is also the, etc/profile is also there, but these values are defined in login.defaults, and it simply means that when a user gets logged in, what are the default properties that the user will get inherited. For example, just in case of file permissions, what are the default file or directory permissions that a user will set on the file or the folder that he or she creates. So let's have a look at this file. Let's have a look in Debian distribution and let's see what this file says. So I'm here at the terminal, and if I type in, let's say, sudo vi/etc/login.defaults, and if I try to search, let's say, umask, and the value that we are seeing over here, let me just try to do it one more time, maybe umask again, and then if I come over here, we see that we have a value of 022, but we also need to read this command, this line which says that if user groups is enabled, then blah blah blah. You can read it yourself. And the result is that if user groups underscore enabled is set, which is set in this file, we can search it as well. Then this 022, it is changed to 002. Now, what does this 002 or this 022 which has become 002, what does it signify? I mean, how, based on this value, how can we set the values? So let's just get out of here. Let's get out of this file and execute the command umask. Now you see that this 0, this signifies that it's an octal value, and this 002, we need to process this 002. Now in case of files, what system does is that it takes the value 666 and it subtracts that umask from it. Now if we do subtraction, we will get 664, or read then write for owner, then read and write for group, and then read only for others. In case of folders, it's 777. So if we subtract 002 from 777, we will get 777 and then 5. So let's head over to the terminal and let's see if we try to create a folder in here by the name of, let's say, file, then what are the values for that? Now if we look at that, this is the file that we have created, and we see that indeed it is 7, then this is also 7, and then this is 5. So based on the umask, the files and the folders that are created by a particular user, they get default file permissions that are defined in either of the etc/profile file, or in etc bash rc file, or in etc login.definitions file. Now that's all there is to it as far as file permissions is concerned, and this file permission system, it has served Linux World for a good deal of time. But there is a new implementation that is coming nowadays, and that is called as access control lists, and this is more flexible as compared to file permissions, and its concept is like there are 3 bits. One is for read, write and execute, and the owner of the file, he or she can associate these bits to an arbitrary number of users and groups, which provides more flexibility as compared to these traditional file permissions. But this functionality, it has to be enabled by the underlying file system, and the commands are to get the permission ACLs, we type in get file ACL, and to set them we type the command set f ACL. This concept, this ACL, it does not need to you do not need to go into detail as far as certification is concerned, but just I wanted to let you know that it's a good time to share with you this information, that modern file systems and files and groups, how they are managed as far as permissions are concerned. So that's all there is to it. I hope you have learned from the video. Thank you for watching.